Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 40, Harmonic Substitutions.
Okay, Eric, I want to talk today about harmony. More specifically, the power of reharmonizing and making harmonic substitutions. And it's a big conversation.
Yeah.
So,
I've been starting this, right? But I need to expand it. And you have the storage of ideas. You got a huge closet. We need to open up.
Well, can we just start with what you've been doing with this? Because I think
so London Bridge is falling down, and then it's 5-1, right? Dominant tonic. London Bridge is falling down, dominant tonic. Well, I take that dominant, and I can do, a 2-7-5-7-1. So a 2-5-1, right? And then I could add extra tones to the dominant, 2-5 with a flat 9, or 2-5 with a sharp 9, or do tritone substitution, 2 flat 2-7-1, right? And I've been doing that with my kids and just say, which one is it? And they can name them or they can recognize them. They don't identify all of them yet, but they recognize that's this one. When I compare that to, 5-1, 2-5-1's easy. The tritone substitution's actually the next easiest because it's just re, ra, do, and it's easier than do, re, so, do, because that so could be this so or that so, or that, could be one with a different, I was going to say altercation. What's the word?
substitution, yeah.
A different
voicing.
No, what's the A word? No, different altercation.
Alteration? Yeah.
Alteration.
Yeah, there you go. Altercation. Maybe.
So flat 9 or sharp 9 or, other things that I've piddled around with, which I don't do as much now that I found, which are the easiest ones. So I'm muddling around with that right now. So, but I want to expand this vocabulary because it's helping me in my audiation.
Sure.
Quite a bit. And I just want to keep expanding that. And then you start writing me a freaking book over text.
Yeah, I think I sent Eric 20 minutes worth of audio notes about this idea.
and voice messages in between. And it's perfect. No, it gets my brain lit up at inappropriate times of the night, but sometimes. But we've tapped into something over time and bouncing this back and forth. But you've got a way better handle on it than I do, because you're the true jazzer here.
Well, and I think this shows like the marriage of, if you understand MLT, you can kind of fuse that with what jazz musicians at large are already doing. That makes sense. But Gordon, in my opinion, adds something truly novel to this in a way that, I mean, Eric, you've seen my own audiation grow over the years from just working on the stuff I've talked about, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I want to highlight a couple things that Eric said that may have flown past people. There's two methods of whatever you want to call it, reharmonizing tunes. There's one method where, take London Bridge, a tune that's just, it's got a certain pattern of 1 and 5 chords. One thing you can do is you can play alterations or different voicings or extensions of the chords that are actually already in the song. So instead of going, we could change it to. So we're just taking the same chords, but we're just dressing them up a bit. We're putting flat 9s, we're putting extensions, major 7s, major 9s. I mean, that's a normal thing that, jazz musicians are doing that pretty much all the time, but classical musicians do this too. They extend, especially dominant chords. But then there's this other method where we're literally changing chords. So, instead of, right, we're actually now we're making substitutions and instead of the 5 chord, we're putting tritone subs in. And, one thing I want to say about this is like when we describe these things theoretically, it sounds like, okay, I should wait until my students can really audiate 1 and 5 chords and they have all the tonal patterns and they're improvising before I even expose them to tritone subs. And I think that I'm now convinced that that is incorrect. I think you should be exposed to these sounds as early as possible. I'm not saying you should expect your students to be able to like improvise over like tritone sub of, the 2/5 of 5 right away. I mean, like that's another story, but exposing people to the sounds is super important because they're not going to learn them unless they have listening vocabulary.
Exactly. That's all I was going to say. Everything starts with the listening vocabulary. And if you're withholding listening vocabulary because it's too difficult, I'm doing air quotes here.
Yes. And how do we decide whether something's too difficult? We often rely on theoretical labels to guide our intuition, which is so wrong to do. Because, like, listen, what's easier to hear? I would argue that the tritone sub there stood out more in my mind, and I've seen students react to this. It's easier in my mind to get students to recognize, like, if you go 1, 5, and 4 as the first group versus 1, 5 and the tritone sub of 5. The tritone sub of 5 is easier to hear. The 4 chord mixes people up more often.
All right, now if you're out there and you're listening like I am, tritone sub of 4, and I can't. That goes past my ears.
So in the key of C major, I mean, if you first teach students to hear C going to G7, and then we're going to add the 4 chord, which is F, so C, G7, and F as like known functions. What I'm saying is I've often found with students that going C, G7, and then D flat 7, it's an easier sound for them to just say, hey, I recognize that instantly. Because it's so odd. It stands out like a sore thumb. But we have these theoretical intuitions that we should wait to expose people to identify those sounds in a progression because it's kind of, it's somehow advanced, air quote. But
how do we label it before we're able to label the, with the vocabulary, like 2/5 of blah or whatever? To me, it's the root movements, right? You do the
you can just say
so you do the root movements and then the tonal patterns over those functions.
And so
but then
go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say take those two, like 2/5-1. Instead of 2/5-1, substitute that something different, but it's in the same context and everything else is the same. Then you know what you're focused on, only the thing that's changing, which is whatever you plug into it.
This point that Eric is making is so important, and it's one of the reasons why. I mean, we called the podcast Audiation the Wild, and part of my mission here with my obsession and love of harmony is to figure out why do random jazz musicians audiate so damn well when they don't even know anything about MLT. And that, you can talk about aptitude and all that kind of stuff, but like there's stuff that they're doing that hasn't been assimilated into MLT culture, and we need to figure out what that is because it clearly just works, right? And one of these things that works is like when you're making discriminations. And we know this we talk about Engelman a lot on this podcast for a good reason, because his ideas are just so valid. It's easier to make discriminations when everything else except the thing you want to be discriminated stays the same. So that's a mouthful. What the hell does that mean in the context of music? It means play a familiar song with a familiar harmonic progression, 1, 1, 5, 1, 1, 1, 5, 1. Change the 5 to something else because everything is remaining the same. The melody of the song's remaining the same. The rhythmic pattern of the harmonic pattern in terms of the harmonic rhythm staying the same. The discrimination is so easy to make in that context because you're comparing it to something that's familiar, right? And so this, in my mind, at least lends some evidence or plausible explanation for why reharmonizing tunes is such a powerful way to get advanced harmonic chops. Like we know Bach reharmonized chorales, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking about Bach a lot because, like in my mind, Bach is basically the OG bebop musician because everything he did like fit over the chords. Totally. Like his harmonic awareness was just rock solid. And so I'm wondering if he got a lot of his harmonic chops from reharmonizing these choral tunes, these choral melodies. And because I've noticed when I'll show you guys what I was showing Eric before. I was taking a simple thing like this in major. So I have a 1 chord there, and I was just putting other chords next to the 1 chord. So I go, that's 1 to 4, but now I'll do 1 to, well, let's see if you can tell what it is. Or this. Or this. And so if you have this little familiar melody, it could be a single tone or a group of a couple tones on top. When you keep making these comparisons, 1 to 4, 1 to, I went to B flat 7, I went to A major 7 one of the times, I went to D minor 7 flat 5. It opens up the door to making a discrimination. Now, am I saying that just hearing that is going to let you improvise all kinds of ridiculous melodies? No, you need to go learn tonal patterns and you need to do all that other stuff on top of that. But this is the doorway to hearing the functions in context. And so yep. Eric's claim that you should learn to hear harmonic patterns before you do tonal patterns, this applies to what I'm doing right now. Before you start learning to sing A flat major 7 in the context of C major, can you even hear the chord?
Yeah, it's the exact same principle.
It's literally the same principle.
It's the same principle. It's just with different content. And then
that's all it is.
And then, so how long have you been playing and listening to jazz? You know, you're 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years. Yeah, and I've been doing this kind of stuff for a while. And you know, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but Joe Pass had this exercise where you take a tone. Let's say this is me in major. And you put as many chords as you can think of over that. And that exercise is really powerful, and I didn't appreciate it.
So explain it again. You're keeping the same tone and the same, not harmonic context, but the same tonality.
Okay, so yeah, so let's back up for a sec.
You're going too fast.
So I established tonality. So I'm in major right now, or Eric's preferred. I established tonality. Whatever method you like for doing that. My method. So I established tonality, and then I choose a tone in that tonality. So right now I'm going to choose the tone Mi. I'm just playing a little melody that takes me to Mi. Okay? Because it sounds more musical to me. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I'm going to put the 1 chord under this. This is important. So I'm taking an exercise that Joe Pass did for practicing scales, but I'm MLT-izing it. I'm Gordoning it to make it adhere to the principles of MLT. Because one of the principles of tonal and harmonic learning is that tonal context needs to be established, or you're not organizing anything in your mind. So if you're playing random functions that you're not hearing in the context of a resting tone, you're flat out wasting your time. So what I'm doing is
inside the harmonic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Context.
So the first thing, establish the resting tone. Then I choose a tone. I'm just choosing Mi for as an example. You can go through all the tones. Okay. Now I'm playing the 1 chord with that over it. I'm playing a major 7 just because I like these voicings, but it's still just a 1 chord. Okay. Now I'm thinking. And I'm doing the backdoor thing here, right? I'm approaching this theoretically, but I'm using the theory to help guide my oral experience. Okay, so what else can I put over that Mi? I mean, Eric, when I say the tone Mi in major, what chords pop in your mind?
Oh, Mi right away is the double dominant.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 1 and then double dominant with the Mi on top. What other chords come to mind?
You can just do 5/7 with it.
Yeah.
You just do a dominant. and then a 4 chord. And then an A7, and then keep it, and then play the D7. Nice.
That's nice. Okay, so there's two ways you can go about this, and one way that I've found very useful: you play the 1 chord, and then a new function. So let's go 1 to 4. Now I'm going to go back to the 1 chord and play a different function. You see how much that stands out now? So this is helping you make the discrimination. So I'm going to keep going back and forth. 1, 4, 1, and then we'll see if you know what that was. It's 1 to 4. Oh, sorry. It's B flat 7. I'm not that worried about the label right now. We're still at the oral level, right? So I don't really care I don't really want to know the theory to why B flat 7 sharp 11 works there. It doesn't matter at this point because you can't audiate it yet. So, I'm all for the theory. Just make sure you know when you're audiating something and when you're not. So at this point, we're just one that I found today that is new for my ear. I'll show you. That was the tritone sub of 5 going to 4. I mean, again, that sounds like a nightmare, but to me, it's not. To me, it's a sound now.
Yeah.
So anyways,
this is one of the episodes we were going to talk about at some point. We're totally going in the back door here, rather than learning to audiate.
Okay, let's take a moment and talk about that. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by going in the back door? Because this is Eric.
Because you don't know how to audiate what you're playing. You're making something up, but then because you played it, it starts to get into your ear. So
exactly.
And then so you're using the keyboard layout visually. You're using theoretical information, consciously to add something to the vocabulary that you have harmonically. And so
for example, the chords that I'm choosing here, I know are chords that have that tone in them, an E right now, or me in this context, right? I'm not choosing these chords randomly, and the reason I chose F major 7 is the 4 chords because it's got the damn tone in it.
Well, you might, or you, like in the case of the B flat 7, it doesn't have E in it, except unless you have a sharp 4 or sharp 11, whatever you want to call it. So that's a cool sound that you're familiar with. You may pick a chord and play that E and find out you just don't like it, or like it doesn't work in this progression or in this
well, here's
sequence.
An example. I played this. I mean, I like that sound. This is D flat 7 with an E on top.
Mm-hmm.
But the pull is strong enough. You can. This is another point. There's sounds at first you might be like, and then a couple weeks later you're like, oh, that one was my favorite.
Yeah, and how you reconcile which ones work and which ones don't will be based in your listening vocabulary, how much jazz you've been listening to.
Oh, sure.
I listened to 45 minutes of Charlie Parker yesterday straight. Mm-hmm. He's like, some of the takes were only 30 seconds long and then a minute long. Mm-hmm. I just kept hearing the same tune, over and over again, but he was playing different solos over it, and and then the engineer would say, stop, mm-hmm. We have an issue, or we're just tuning up the microphones or whatever. But it's an experience to right, sure. To do Charlie Parker, Charlie Parker a tune versus what you're suggesting to get us to that point, being able to audiate functions and the tones that would fit either maintaining a tone or changing functions or both, so that we can better discriminate among the functions that you have.
Yeah, the tone, the stabilized tone on top makes the discrimination of the functions easier to do because the change stands out more aggressively when the tone has been pinned. So you don't
it's
have
something
to
else that's you're maintaining something else besides the harmonic rhythm, the tune, the resting tone is the same. Even when you
Mhm.
add those functions, you're still retaining the global resting tone. Although you might need to, and I think this would happen with lower aptitude or lower tonal aptitude, where you actually feel like a change in tonality quickly, rather than holding the bigger bowl of the tonality of the
Yeah,
song.
yeah.
You've
Can
now
I give?
got tripped into you've tripped into a
Yes.
a need to hold on to
Uh-huh.
something more simple.
Can I give everyone an example of what you're talking about?
Hmm.
Okay, so if I'm in the key of C, does it sound like we left major to you?
No.
So to me, it doesn't. If I go, I don't hear that as a new law. This it still sounds like Ray to me. Does it sound like
Yeah.
Ray to you?
Yep.
Does that sound like Ray or Law?
Ray.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a thing that happens with all the secondary dominant stuff, is because we're technically pulling stuff from other keys. You can hear it as a true modulation. Now that sounds like Law to me. But so it depends how you hear it, right? And I think the more refined your harmonic audiation skills get, the less when you do different secondary dominant changes or steps into other things, it doesn't actually feel like the resting tone changed. It felt like something happened nestled inside the resting tone. And so what Eric was getting at is you might have to establish context more frequently to not throw people off. So I was just doing all this stuff. Part of the reason I keep putting the one chord in between everything is it helps keep the context pinned in your mind. Because if I just
Right.
went like this, I mean, to me, it still sounds like I'm in nothing
Yeah.
changed. But someone else might hear those as random, nonsense that is not contextualized. So putting the one chord in between everything. But this is another thing you can do. I mean, screw the exercise I just said. Is instead of taking a me like me and just pinning different harmony over it, just take a melody from a tune and put different functions over it, because that's going to help you make the discrimination. You need something to retain, right? Because the brain. Eric talked earlier about when you take a tune like London Bridge and it's got this 1-1-5-1, you can actually take advantage of the harmonic rhythm staying the same, right? So instead of 1-1-5-1, you could go. And so I'm not even putting things that make sense as a substitution for five. I was just putting it in the same place, and they just stand out because your brain's retaining the spot that it goes in. I think
Yeah.
that Eric is the value of learning the blues form,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
you learn a form that you can just. It's actually beautiful that the blues is so simple because you can do more to it. Like, what can you do to giant steps? You can put tritone subs in it, but like, it's already too full of stuff to do. So
Yeah.
this is the funny
It's an
thing about.
exercise. It's not a tune.
Yeah, there you go. But what I'm getting at is like simpler tunes actually lend themselves to substitution almost better.
Well, I actually, for my baby class yesterday, I played the blues for them. We're just moving. I mean, it's why are we not doing that
Mhm.
very much? I don't think that's happening. And and it doesn't have a segment in the back of the book of the of music play. Everybody worked so hard to write all these tunes that are in all the tonalities and meters and styles and whatever's in there, and the style's kind of lacking to me. But
Sure.
the variety of you know the variety of styles in it. But like I it's like, why isn't there an appendix that has, you should be playing the blues for these kids. You should be, uh I mean, why more, there needs to be there needs to be expanding the harmonic and the stylistic vocabulary. The kids make it as wide as possible, and it gets to a, a point of absurdity if you start considering, Tibetan culture and, Irish culture and, you know,
Sure.
gamelan, and you start going all over the place.
Yeah, content is
What do
very
we
debatable for
what do
sure.
we want to yeah what do we want to actually what is your purpose? Like, do you want to forward Western, you know, Western only, or white only, or you know,
Yeah, and that's a very
folk
interesting
only,
conversation.
like in like what's your priority? I want to go back to something. I didn't want to go off too far in
No, go
that
ahead.
direction, but I want to go back to something that an experience I had in the last week or two. Um, Remember, I was in the band and learning these tunes in the band,
Oh yeah, sure.
and I mentioned something before, like how. So, what's really helped me recently is it's more going in the back door in a way, than just trying to learn it by ear. Just
That's right.
wrote off of the video, or off of the recording. I started dictating. It's very slowly, one measure at a time or two
Hmm.
measures at a time when things got really wild. Uh, I would just do a pattern and a pattern, just one measure. I go back and play over it, make sure I got it right, and do
Hmm.
it again. Oh my God, I learned that tune so much quicker than I had been doing. So I'm using notation like
You're
as
using
I,
notation as a map to what to do oral with,
yeah,
basically,
and then
in
I could
smaller
look at
pieces.
something I should be able, I should almost be able to audiate when I look at that, when I look at the map.
Hmm.
It makes it clear, even though the rhythm might not be accurate. I'm much better tonally dictating than I am rhythmically, but rhythmically I'm much stronger, um, aptitude wise,
So
which is interesting to me.
this is such an important point in terms of there is nothing wrong with theoretical understanding going starting with theory, as long as you're very 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 aware that that's what you're doing and you're establishing context. Those are two very big there's a lot of varies. Those are two very big qualifiers. If you don't establish context, nothing you do is going to be stored in the context you need it to be stored in. So if you're not hearing it in major and the whole tune's in major with all these crazy substitutions, you just stored nothing. You just stored other patterns in your mind. But if you also aren't aware of when you're audiating and when you're not, that opens up a huge problem. Because if
Yeah, I was imitating to get something on the page so I could play it, and then I go, oh yeah, and it's like that's what it is, and then it would click in, and then I'd throw the paper away.
Mhm. And as another example, what I'm doing when I start theoretically and I do things like this, I will often keep repeating the exact same pattern because I'm trying to do kind of like familiar patterns in familiar order, right? Because the whole point of this is that you need to be able to predict things that are about to happen. If you're not able to predict things, and singing is such a powerful way to prove if you can predict it or not, because if you're scooping into notes, you're at imitation. If you're hitting notes just bang on and you could pre hear them in your mind, pre-audiate them before you're playing them, something's really going on in your mind, And so what I see is there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, what chords fit with an E note in C major, F sharp 7, all this stuff, E minor 7 flat 5. Just know that when you do that, if you're audiating or not, just know that, okay,
Yeah,
I'm at
yeah.
oral with this. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, Now, then there's the whole question of should you teach a 6-year-old all the theory so they can do that with themselves? No, don't do that. Record what I just did and have them listen to it because it's going to be more expedient. But at some point, it does get useful to just know how to force this stuff into your mind, theoretically. And everyone has a different. I was speaking with a student today about this, or with another music teacher, and I was saying I had this student a couple years ago who was 16, and the kid, it was just like huge ears, right? I mean, his tonal
Yeah.
aptitude is clearly just like through the roof, but he didn't have this stuff in his pattern vocabulary. So like there were things that I could audiate he couldn't, but it wasn't because his aptitude wasn't high enough. It's just he hadn't been through the motions, right? But the thing is, like, the kid was also super smart. I could teach him the theory and say, like, okay, D flat 7 is a tritone sub of G7. This is how you find it on the guitar, yada, 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 this many half steps. that was actually useful for him because he would go home with that information and construct the scales and then listen to them and sing them.
How old was
That
he?
he was 16.
Okay.
And I heavily recommended that to his parents that he take, playing jazz seriously. And he loved jazz too. And so I didn't see anything wrong with that because he was actually using the information in a way that at the end of the week, it made his audiation better.
All right. We're breaking all kinds of rules in this episode, like the technical rules of it's not music learning theory. Music learning theory is always in action, like small MLT, right? It's always at work, even when you don't know. And I think one of the bottom lines of this whole thing this whole discussion, is that I've got an intrinsic motivation to be ready for rehearsal in the band. Mm-hmm. You've got this incredible intrinsic motivation to keep expanding your jazz vocabulary and solidifying,
Sure.
the basics of 2-5-1s and alterations in certain progressions, so that you're more free on the bandstand when you are playing. So this intrinsic motivation, your 16-year-old, he's already driven. So you're giving him tools, and that's
and he's already auditing like 1-4-5 in major and in minor, and he's singing tonal patterns and all this stuff. And then I just tried. I'm like,
yeah. So these jazz musicians in the wild are all already intrinsically motivated, hanging out with each other, talking about this stuff, and whether they get it from what would be the appropriate way to teach children, oral, verbal association, partial synthesis.
But see, the thing, Eric, the thing with this kid, he was already hearing me play these things when we were playing together. He knew what this sound was. He just didn't have a name for it, like these tritones stuff, right?
I'm just saying that these jazz musicians in the wild who don't adhere to music learning theory practices.
Well, it seems like they don't at first.
Well, I'm talking capital MLT now.
Exactly. It seems like first, this person's using theory. They're not doing oral. Like,
there needs to be a merging of small MLT and capital MLT. They need to feed each other.
Well, that's my point about like when I found this Joe Pass exercise, he wasn't saying stay in the context of major and play a bunch of different functions over the single tone. He was just talking about practicing scales. He was just like, okay, put a G on top and play all these different scales going up to G. But then I noticed when I, from my Gordon based ideas, I was like, well, if I just do that and stay in context of one tonality, maybe this will help me hear functions better in the tonality. It clearly does. There's no I would love for other people to experiment with this, and I've recommended this to a bunch of students that are older and have better kind of harmonic awareness. But I'm convinced this is a good thing to do with your time, beyond shadow of a doubt. I don't need Gimel to sign off on it.
Oh, well, no.
But I do agree with you that we need a marriage of capital MLT and lowercase MLT, and I think a lot of it comes from the theory that Gordon put forward is rock solid in that sense. And so if you marry if you marry Gordon's ideas, the idea of making discriminations with the idea in the jazz scene of reharmonizing tunes, why would reharmonizing tunes allow someone to make more refined discriminations? Aptitude aside. It's because it's following principles that are even in theory of instruction. It's fucked how all these different sources, they're pointing at the same thing, right?
Yeah. Yep. It definitely, it's like we've Gordon got deeper than the atom. And now string theory is starting to evolve underneath it. And it's will it eventually merge? And how does it merge? Or does it all have to do with, the black, but
the situation you find yourself in when you're teaching has a lot to do with how you're going to proceed here, right? So when I'm teaching young kids, I'm using solfege, I'm doing all the things that everyone recommends. But I have a 17-year-old kid who's like, hey, I'm going to go to jazz university. I'm going to university and study jazz next year. I'm like, you got to learn pitch letters, dude. I'm sorry. You're at this point, if you're planning to be a professional musician, just follow, I'm going to make sure you're audiating everything you do, but I'm not going to introduce pitch letters like that until I know they can solo over.
Well, you're not giving them pitch. See, the slam on pitch letters is that we use them to teach the instrument and to teach, right? there's different purposes for pitch letters.
Yeah, like trust
And
me,
you,
I'm
and
not
that's
saying pitch letters and bypass oral. I'm just
no.
saying the reason there's a verbal associate system that has evolved in the context of jazz that you'll just find
Yeah.
it easier to navigate.
Yeah, I don't think there was ever a discussion that I know of that talks about pitch letters the way you talk about pitch letters, because pitch letters is always just, names of notes, lines of spaces, so I can get a horn in my mouth and I can rote learn something using the right fingerings and like that, but have no audiation
Yeah.
as its basis. You're fundamentally audiation all the time, 100%. And there's tricks to getting there that aren't necessarily established in the MLT, capital M,
Well, that's why I get fired
tradition.
up when
And
someone's like teaching pitch letters destroys audiation because it's not that simple. It really isn't that simple. It
yeah,
can, and it very well often
it, it
does.
it is that simple when you're talking about starting a kid on trumpet and they don't have any listening vocabulary. They have
Yeah, sure.
no basis for it. Then
Yeah.
but you eventually there's a gray zone, which you and I are definitely dabbling in. I can't wait till I can get enough vocabulary to
I've
fight
made a
you.
deal with the devil, and I'm fine with pitch letters. No, my cutoff is once you start playing, once you have 1, 4, 5 in major and minor under your fingers, and you can intelligently improvise like that, the floodgates are open for me.
All
I'm
right,
not
yeah, this
concerned
is
at
going
all.
to be a controversial episode, but I'm on board with exactly what you're saying. I don't know when, I think we've got to come up together with a method book, and anybody that wants to help us, please feel free to contact us and talk us through, talk me through, talk Beau through your ideas, talk us into, your ideas, give us,
But to back up a sec, like even let's do aside with
okay,
verbal associate systems. These functions should be like available for people to hear. Like I was telling
yeah,
Eric off air, if you take the key of C, C major, every single dominant chord
yeah,
is audiatable in some way. Like I'm not saying this as some kind of pedantic exercise that you can engage in. Every single one of the 12 dominant chords in C major goes somewhere that is worth learning to audiate. And I don't think a lot of people are exposing their students to those sounds.
no,
I mean, and
no.
that's why people aren't
So,
learning to audiate that stuff.
so I just think there's got to be better literature or better recordings or better, but what I mean is more appropriate literature for young children to get jazz in their bones
I don't
earlier
even think it's young
without.
kids, Eric. I think it's just people at large because like
I think so too, I'm, I'm, I just want to work with, my group up to
let
the
me
eight, nine
unpack the
year olds.
problem that Eric is pointing at here. So if you listen to like crazy jazz musicians, you just have no idea what's going on. Like a lot of people don't even enjoy it because they're not at the level they can audiate enough of what's happening where it's even enjoyable to listen to. And so what Eric and I have identified as being something that is really needed is simple tunes that are, we can just stay in major and minor for now. Simple tunes that add these foreign functions, but that kind of stay simple. Like I'm talking about tunes like with 1, 4, and 5 that add one extra crazy function. And the problem in the jazz scene is that by the time you get into like bebop and post bop and hard bop and God knows what comes after that, everything is just fucking crazy to the point where if you're not a good audiator, it's so hard to even deal with in a sense. You just can't
Yep,
even
yep,
handle
yep.
it. And so like I'm just talking about tunes that are like this. Like something with just like one foreign function. Because if you rewind in the history of jazz, this is how bebop musicians evolved jazz.
Yep,
They took
yep.
simple tunes with simple harmony, 2, 5, 1s, and they started adding substitutions. So it's often more useful. Go back and learn swing tunes. Go back and learn nursery rhyme tunes and do your own harmonic substitutions. Don't start with giant steps, Start with something very simple and put one kind of crazy chord in. And I think that's it's ultimately more rewarding because you can audiate what you're doing. I mean, just like when you take little kids, you sing simple melodies that establish meter and context, in different tonalities. You need to do that with these different functions, and I don't think we have that in general. Uh,
Listening vocabulary, and then a sequence of tunes that would help expand that harmonic vocabulary, and doing it all in the ways that you're suggesting with
mm,
these exercises that I think would hone. You know, it's working for you. It's going to work. It's the same principles as what we said is what I've been doing with my little ones, and I
mm.
know they're, and I know they're getting it.
Yeah,
And
and
I'm
then
just learning how to teach it, like at this level. And I don't know about the how so much. It's like it's the next level of because they can do, you know, dominant of all the diatonic, you know,
yes.
and they can do that.
Well, I mean that is the path, by the way. So the path is 1 4 5. Then you get into secondary dominance. It's the dominant of all of the basic chords. So
Hmm.
dominant of 1, dominant of 2, dominant of 3. Then you do the 2 5s of those. Then you do the tritone substitutions of the 5s. That gives you a lot. There's actually only a couple more things that you need on top of that. Well, I mean, one of them is in the key of C, F minor 7 to B flat 7 is really common. That's called the backdoor dominant or backdoor 2 5 1. That one's really common. You see that all over the place. And you can get into the theory of why that works. It's not as important as just knowing how to play it and just playing it. But I mean, that's the path.
Yeah,
And that if you just do
yeah,
that
but
in, yeah,
but
go ahead.
not avoiding the listening of all that way ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah, you need to.
Yeah.
And so if you're an adult yourself, let's say you're a music teacher, and you're trying to put this stuff in your own ear, one of the ways you can put these tritone subs, for example, in your ear is put them underneath melodies that you can already audiate because they will be in context that way, and that's the genius of that. If you try to just sit at home and go like this, that might sound good to you. It might not. A lot of people, when they hear a tritone sub for the first time like that, they're like, so what? But when you hear it being played in an actual tune, when it's pinned to a melody that's familiar to you, the thing just all of a sudden is like, oh, there's something there.
Yep.
That's why I love doing at the end of Happy Birthday. That's the first time I teach half diminished too. And if you think that kids aren't audiating well, they will look at you when you play that and say that is beautiful. 5-year-old kids will tell you that that's beautiful, and clearly something's going on, right? But like Eric said, there's a method to this. It's first being exposed to the harmony in a song as a gestalt. So you're hearing the function. I have no doubt if you can recognize the function, then as long as you can sing and all that, you're ready to start learning to sing the tonal patterns. But Eric is onto something here with harmonic learning sequence. If you try to sing the tonal patterns for all this versus do what I'm saying first and then sing the tonal patterns, the difference is like being on steroids, Eric. Like it's not even comparable. The tonal patterns,
No.
they just drop right into everything. And that's why I'm such a fan of Eric's work, is because I recognize, as a backstory, when I came to MLT and I read Gordon's book, I could audiate the stuff he was talking about. I could audiate in different tonalities, all these functions. There wasn't really anything in learning sequences that was surprising to me, but I was like, how do I audiate this new stuff that I want to audiate well using these principles? And so I started trying to find someone who had actually gone into teaching harmonic audiation more seriously. And I found Eric because if you can do this with a 3-year-old, you're looking at something that makes sense, essentially.
Well, that's the point. I learned it from them. I didn't come up with it. They told me what they could do.
Exactly. So,
I didn't formulate it in the office, which I think a lot is happening that way, which is fine. We're expanding on really viable techniques to do music learning theory, not just in learning sequences, the activities that you do hopefully more than once a period and not just for 10 minutes each time, that you actually apply, uh, learn to apply these things in classroom activities and other things to reinforce the learning that you've done another way.
Mhm.
So, you're teaching one thing one way and they learn it. It's like, well, good. Now go come at it a different way and see if they've got it.
Well, and that is why I found this example of pinning a tone to the top of a set of functions.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of looking at things because most people are singing patterns like there's with pauses, they're singing tonal patterns, but I find doing this is way different. You learn something different when a single tone is pinned at the top. And, I'm sure someone eventually will find out the reason for that. All I can say is that it works. It works really well. And so, I mean, that's it.
It's a melodic context, I guess, right?
I think that's
You're,
what it
you're
is.
forcing
Yeah.
yourself to get your ear to resolve on that note or to make that note into a particular tension that will release on the next function, or that you start to audiate like the value of that note in all its contexts.
Yeah.
That doesn't include necessary. Well, the harmonic context it does include, but it's not forcing you to go outside of your tonality or anything. It's already
Yeah.
and the harmonic rhythm, the melody, and you're saying that has to be the note in the melody at that point. So, Bo, I'd love for you to write a book of melodies, like just 20 melodies that have different progressions.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's something that I'll do because I think a lot of, I think a lot of MLT teachers would just benefit from doing something like this,
Oh yeah, no, anybody that's composing, it's like what happened to my audiation when I had to transcribe some of the stuff I was listening for my band or whatever.
Mhm.
Whatever exercise you're putting yourself through now, it's like, okay, now nail down something that just truly turns you on, earwise, and make a melody with these special progressions in them, and then
What you said though a minute ago, I think is really hits the nail on the head. Is that it's linking harmonic awareness to melodic audiation. So if I go, so
it's yeah, it's
I'm
beautiful.
I'm audiating this note. I'm just putting different tones under do,
Yep.
and I think that's why it helps people get the new function in their ear because you're already hopefully. I mean, I don't think if you to go on record, I don't think if you were audiating that do coming, then I don't think what I'm saying actually would help someone in the same way. But if you are auditing that, the new functions they just kind of explode into existence. Like they just jump into
Yeah.
your ear all of a sudden, even when they're
Yeah.
crazy.
It's filling. I think it's your new. I don't mean unnutritionally, but it's like your new junk food that you're like gonna cram down and
Mhm.
eat so much to the point where these things get memorized or put into your. And I don't mean memorized, but like on total instant recall whenever you need it.
So I think that's where this goes. Is that at first when you do this, you can make the discriminations, but there's a difference between being able to make the discriminations and having the pattern stored in your memory because you need the pattern in your memory as vocabulary for you to start predicting them, and that's what's going to lead to improvising with them and all of that. But it's such a beautiful way to start doing it, and honestly, it's so fun. Like you wouldn't believe how fun it is, and that's why I will defend in terms of using some theoretical understanding because if you know these chords theoretically, you have a place to at least start with experimenting. You know?
Yeah, I think the avoiding, and it's not theoretical understanding, it's music theory, what you're avoiding ultimately, because theoretical understanding presupposes you've got the audiation already. But what I was going to
Yeah,
say
that is correct. That is correct. Yeah.
yeah, that once see, once you've broken the sequence and have gone into theoretical understanding, or music theory, once you've broken that and you live in that world and it's an easy world to live in because it's easier to communicate. It's shorthand for so many things that we need to talk about. So I don't have to sit and have a piano around me all the time to tell you what I'm audiating. Um,
Mhm.
that once you've broken the sequence and the kids are not improvising, the kids are not composing yet, and you've gotten yourself slipped into, music theory, that you can't take the music theory back out again. You can't eliminate it because
Well, it's even similar. It's
you've
like,
already opened the box.
yeah, yeah, I agree, and it's even similar with verbal association because like once someone has started to learn verbal associates and they can audiate with them and they've gone through partial synthesis, then when you give them something new at the oral level, they already fucking know there's going to be verbal associates with it. They may not know what they are yet,
Yeah,
but they know
yeah,
they exist. And the same thing happens
yeah,
with theoretical understanding. Once you've gotten to the point where there's certain things that you have a theoretical understanding for, then when you learn new content, you know there's going to be explanations for it. And so
yeah.
yeah, I think you just got to be very discerning. And Eric pointed out a really good point. I was actually meaning music theory
Yep, yep.
in this context.
Yeah, we
You know,
try to, yeah, it's
no,
still
I think
something
being
that's in the,
precise about that is
yep.
good. Yeah,
Um, is there such a word as whelming? It's not, your passion is not overwhelming, it's not underwhelming, it's definitely whelming
yeah. I
in
mean,
this.
harmony is like it's one of the most interesting
I-
things. I mean, it's this is the reason I learned to play piano is because it's just the instrument that you can
yeah, yeah,
you know, I'm much better guitar player than I am piano player. This is my main instrument, but sometimes just some of this stuff is so easy to do on the piano. I mean,
yeah.
to play this chord on the guitar in that exact voicing is, you could injure yourself. Unless you get into some, weird altered
Well, you
tunings.
gotta,
But what I'm getting at here is with this exercise is if you go through this exercise I just did now with every single tone in one key, you really know the harmony in that key, like really well.
yeah,
If
all
you
right.
can sing the patterns for that,
Yeah,
it's absurd. And this is something that we were talking about before. Is like major is so beautiful, and then like Lydian and Dorian used to always be my favorite tonalities, but I've been thinking about this in the past couple of weeks. Major is my favorite, and if you're talking about this kind of major, then yeah, Dorian's better. But once you start talking about tonalities that can handle harmonic substitutions and beatings, like major is kind of like the wood between the worlds, like that lets you do all this stuff. Even in minor, you're a little restricted in terms of how crazy you can get when compared to major. Minor, but then after that, like the other tonalities, they don't seem to be able to tolerate this level
yeah.
of beating.
What's the, what is the, yeah, what, what is the tritone substitution in Dorian?
Yeah, I mean it's
That's all
just
right.
nasty. It's nasty
Let's not
stuff.
go. Let's not go any deeper.
Yeah, and actually, just to wrap up, if anyone has questions about this or wants to do some of this work with their own um, audiation, send me an email. We can set up a program for you and get you moving in the right direction.
All right, man. This is good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much.
Let us know how we do.